It's 40,000 BC. You wake up in your small cave community, maybe 15, 20 people. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows what everyone ate for breakfast. Everyone definitely knows what you did last Tuesday. And last Tuesday, you stole someone's meat. Not a little meat, their whole share. The share that was supposed to feed their kids through the night. Now the whole group knows. They're looking at you. And there is no police station to hand you over to. There is no courtroom. There is no lawyer to argue that technically the meat was in a legally ambiguous location. There is no jail cell to lock you in while society figures out what to do with you. There is just 20 people staring at you around a fire, deciding your fate on the spot. What happens next is one of the most fascinating and genuinely strange chapters in all of human history. Because ancient humans absolutely had criminals. They had theft, assault, murder, betrayal, and every other flavor of antisocial behavior that we deal with today. But without any of the systems we built to handle it, they had to figure out justice from scratch. And the way they did it, sometimes brutal, sometimes surprisingly wise, tells us something uncomfortable about where our modern systems actually came from, and whether we actually improved things. Because by the end of this, you might find yourself wondering if the most sophisticated justice system in human history was not Rome, not Babylon, but something much older, and much simpler, and almost entirely forgotten. Let's start with the obvious question. Before laws existed, did crime even exist? Technically, no. Crime is a legal concept. You cannot break a law that has not been written. But humans figured out very early that some behaviors are simply incompatible with group survival. And in a small band of hunter-gatherers, group survival was not a political talking point. It was the only thing standing between you and death by leopard. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer communities, groups that have lived with minimal outside contact, have consistently found something remarkable. Every single one of them has a system for handling antisocial behavior. Not the same system, not even similar systems necessarily, but always a system. Because the alternative is the group falling apart. And a group that falls apart in the African savanna 40,000 years ago is not a group that survives to have descendants. So the very first form of justice was not about punishment at all, it was about survival maintenance. Think about what actually threatens a small prehistoric band. Theft undermines the food sharing that keeps everyone alive. Violence between members destroys cooperation. A person who consistently takes more than they contribute weakens the whole group. And someone who betrays the group to outsiders. That person is an existential threat in the most literal sense. The first question ancient humans asked about a wrongdoer was never how do we punish this person? It was how do we stop this person from destroying us? That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this story. So, what were the actual options? Let's go through them from mildest to most extreme, because ancient justice had a surprisingly well-developed spectrum. The first and by far most common response was something so simple it almost sounds like nothing: public shaming. And before you laugh at that, understand what public shaming means in a group of 20 people who you cannot leave and who you depend on for literally everything. It is not someone posting something mean about you on the internet from a safe distance. It is every single person who controls your access to food, shelter, protection, and companionship, making it very clear that you have failed the group. There is nowhere to go. There is no other friend group to join. There is no closing an app. The shame is total, and it is constant. Researchers studying the Kungsan people of the Kalahari and several indigenous communities in South America and Australia found that social pressure of this kind is extraordinarily effective as a deterrent and a corrective. People change their behavior fast when their entire social world depends on it. We evolved in these small groups. The psychological pain of social exclusion runs so deep that modern brain scans show social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Being shut out genuinely hurts in a way the body registers as equivalent to injury. Ancient humans knew this intuitively, even without the neuroscience, they weaponized it. The second response was something anthropologists call leveling, and this one is genuinely interesting. In many hunter-gatherer societies, the specific behavior that most threatened group harmony was not violence or theft. It was arrogance. A person who hoarded resources, who refused to share, who acted as though they were better or more important than others. This person was a structural threat to the egalitarianism that kept small bands functional. The community response was systematic public mockery. Not cruel, not violent, just relentlessly deflating. The Juwansi people of southern Africa have a practice called insulting the meat, where even an excellent hunter's kill is described as small and disappointing. Not because they believe this, but because a hunter who gets too proud about his skills might start demanding special treatment. Keep him humble. Keep the group flat. Keep everyone dependent on everyone else. This is ancient humans engineering social outcomes through humor and collective pressure. It is remarkably sophisticated, and it worked for tens of thousands of years. But what about when these soft measures failed? When someone kept stealing, kept hurting people, kept taking without giving? What then? This is where it gets significantly darker. The next option was ostracism, formal, deliberate exile from the group. In the language of ancient justice, this was essentially a death sentence delivered without anyone having to swing anything. Cast out of the group, alone in a world full of predators, rival bands, and environments you do not know, your chances of survival were extremely low, not zero. People did survive alone, but it required extraordinary skill and extraordinary luck, and it was understood by everyone involved that exile was a severe punishment, even if it looked like simply asking someone to leave. What makes this genuinely interesting is how deliberate the process was. In most hunter-gatherer societies studied, exile was not a snap decision made in anger. It required something remarkably close to a community consensus. Everyone had to more or less agree that this person had to go, because the cost of getting it wrong in either direction was high. Exile an innocent person, and you have just destroyed trust within the group. Fail to exile a genuinely dangerous person, and that person keeps damaging the group. There was also a deeply practical consideration that most people never think about. In a group of 20 people, every single person represents roughly 5% of your total labor force, your total genetic diversity, your total knowledge base. You cannot afford to throw people away casually. Even a criminal was a hunter, a forager, a firekeeper. Their skills had value. You exiled them only when keeping them cost more than losing them. This calculus, this cold practical accounting of human value against social damage, is one of the oldest forms of justice in the world. And it is not entirely gone from our systems today. We just dress it up in different language. There is one documented case from the Netsilik Inuit of northern Canada that illustrates exactly how deliberate this process was. A man named Padlu had killed two other men in the community over several years. Both times the group absorbed it. Both times they weighed the cost. He was a skilled hunter. He was useful. The calculation kept coming back in his favor. Then he killed a third time. The community met. The consensus came back differently this time. His own brother carried out the exile. Not because the brother wanted to, because the group had decided and someone had to do it, and the responsibility fell to the person closest to the offender. There was no sheriff. There was no executioner on a payroll. Just a community that had finally run the numbers and reached a different answer. That detail, that it was the brother, says everything about how personal and how devastating ancient justice could be, and how seriously it was taken. Then there was restitution, which might be the most surprisingly modern thing ancient humans ever came up with. Before punishment, before jails, before courts, the most common response to theft or damage in many early societies was simply give it back, replace what you took, compensate the person you harmed, make the wronged party whole again. This seems obvious when you say it out loud. If someone steals your food, the most direct solution is to return the food or replace it with equivalent food. Punishing the thief additionally does not actually feed you, the restitution does. Anthropological records from dozens of pre-state societies show that restitution-based justice was incredibly widespread. Disputes over stolen goods, damaged property, even physical injuries were frequently resolved through negotiated compensation rather than punishment. The community would gather, hear both sides, and arrive at what was owed. Pay it, and the matter was settled. There is something almost jarring about this when you sit with it. Before civilization invented elaborate systems of justice, the most natural human response to being wronged was often just to be made whole again. Not to see the other person suffer, not to demonstrate the power of authority. Just fix what was broken. We will come back to why that matters. Now, let's talk about what happened at the extreme end. When someone did something so severe, so threatening to the group, that no soft measure and no exile would suffice, some acts were met with death, and the way ancient communities arrived at and carried out that decision is one of the most fascinating and disturbing things in this whole story. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm, who spent decades studying hunter-gatherer societies across the world, documented something he called reverse dominance hierarchy. The idea is this: In most animal social groups, the strongest individual dominates the others. But in human hunter-gatherer bands, the group collectively holds down anyone who tries to dominate. Egalitarianism is actively enforced. What this means in practice is that when someone becomes genuinely dangerous, the community response could be lethal. And crucially, it was collective. Not one person deciding to execute another. The whole group, or the adult males of the group, acting together so that no single person carries the burden or becomes a target for retaliation. Bohm found accounts of this pattern in hunter-gatherer societies on multiple continents. The details varied. The mechanism was often surprisingly consistent. The group decides together. The group acts together. The group shares the moral weight together. This is arguably the oldest form of capital punishment in human history. Not a state executing a criminal, a community collectively removing a threat. The distinction feels subtle until you think about who holds the power in each scenario. In the community model, the power to decide who lives and dies belongs to everyone, collectively, reached through something close to consensus. And this is the point in the story where things get genuinely uncomfortable, because what happened next in the history of human justice is not a story of progress in a straight line. It is something considerably more complicated. Around 10,000 years ago, humans started settling down. Agriculture, permanent villages, then cities, then states. And with states came something entirely new. Written law, professional enforcement, courts, prisons, the entire apparatus of formal justice that we now consider civilization. And here is what that transition actually looked like in practice. The moment a chief, a king, a pharaoh, any centralized authority took control of justice, two things happened simultaneously. First, justice became more consistent. The same rule applied in theory to everyone, written down, predictable, not subject to the mood of whichever 20 people happened to be sitting around the fire that night. That is a genuine improvement. But second, and this is the part nobody puts in the history books, justice became a tool of power. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest written legal codes in the world, dating to around 1754 BC in ancient Babylon, is often cited as a landmark of civilization. An early example of law applied equally and predictably, and what you actually find is a document with entirely different punishments for the same crime, depending on whether you are a free person, a freed person, or a slave. Strike a free man, and you are fined. Strike a slave owner, and you lose a hand. The law was written by the powerful for the powerful. Modern justice has scale, consistency, and procedural protections that ancient systems could never have imagined. Those things matter enormously and should not be dismissed. But somewhere in the 10,000 years between that campfire and a courtroom, something was also lost. The idea that justice belongs to the community it affects, that the people most harmed by a wrong should have a meaningful voice in how it is addressed. That making someone whole again might matter more than making someone suffer. The concept of bringing the wrongdoer, the wronged, and the community together to decide collectively what repair looks like rather than what punishment looks like. It is considered a radical and innovative approach to modern criminal justice. It is also more or less exactly what your ancestors were doing around a fire 40,000 years ago. If you think our modern system has genuinely nothing in common with exile or public shaming, I would actually love to hear that argument in the comments. Because the more you look at it, the harder that case becomes to make. We did not evolve beyond that system. We just forgot we built it.